For public hearing and final action, ordinance 9-18 is entitled Ordinance of the Township of Morris, County of Morris, New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 95 entitled Zoning by adding a new Article 12 entitled Small Cell Equipment, Wireless Cabinets, and Wireless Poles in the municipal right-of-way. And I understand that as part of the introduction, this ordinance may require two small non-substantive amendments. One is to the duration of the master license, is that correct, Mr. Purcell, master license, from 10 to 15 years, and the other one alters the size of the equipment cabinet to something not greater than
24 feet.
24 feet. So if someone...
28 feet, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, 9584 is the master license agreement reference, and 9586A1 is the cabinet size to 28, restricting it to 28 cubic feet in volume. So if the mayor would ask for an introduction, asking that they'll offer or accept those amendments, and then a second on the same basis, we could then proceed with an explanation by Mr. Purcell.
Okay. Motion, please. I'll make that motion. Second? Okay, thank you. Now, before we start the public portion of it, we're going to have Mr. Purcell, our expert, give you his thought process as to what we're doing as far as approval and non-approval of these cell towers and adjacent things. And he'll be joined by our engineer, Jim Slate. Okay? Ed?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just going to write a quick overview for this ordinance, which was introduced and went to the planning board and found to be consistent with the township's master plan. As was stated, as John stated, there were some changes to the ordinance. The goals of this ordinance are pretty simple. It's to help facilitate the adoption of 21st century telecommunications in the township, but in a way to ensure safety for those using the right-of-way to walk or drive, to ensure that the township's right-of-way is managed to allow for other utilities to use that finite space, and to protect the legitimate aesthetic interests of the township. Again, just an overview of the technology. Small cells are essentially small cell towers. They're pretty tiny. They go up onto existing poles. They're necessary for 5G. That's the next iteration of wireless technology. The small cell nodes, which are little antenna, approximately 25 inches by 15 inches. The cabinets are 53 inches by 23 inches. Certain cabinets, when they're on the ground, will be a pedestal, and in certain circumstances, new poles could be required. Small cell nodes go on the pole, cabinets go on the pole on the ground. The way that this ordinance is broken up, it would allow small cell nodes and cabinets to be placed on existing poles through an administrative process under Title 48. Essentially, it would be done vis-a-vis an approval by the Township Committee of a supplemental license to a master license that's entered into by any entity that wishes to place these facilities into the right of way. And for ground level cabinets and new poles, they go to the Township's land use boards. In residential areas, they would be a prohibited use, and in non-residential areas, they would be a conditionally permitted use.
Would you just repeat those last two sentences?
Sure. The wireless poles in residential areas, wireless poles, that is new poles, are prohibited. In residential areas, ground level cabinets, that is cabinets that are on the ground that are connected to small cell facilities, are also prohibited. In non-residential areas, they are conditionally permitted. The conditions are that the cabinet can't be any, based on this amendment, any larger than 28 cubic feet. The cabinet has to be camouflaged with necessary technology. Essentially, it's meant to limit the right-of-way impact, the safety impact, and the aesthetics, negative aesthetic impact on the right-of-way. So again, the goal of this ordinance is to help the township protect its safety interest in the right-of-way, the safety of its residents to drive along the right-of-way and to walk along the right-of-way, to manage the right-of-way because there's a lot of utilities there, and to protect aesthetics. So So that's my overview.
Could I ask a question, sir? Why and what efficacy is there for us to take preemptive action?
Well, so this is an issue which is every municipality is dealing with. As I said in my introduction, these are essentially small cell towers which are used to provide personal wireless service, and as such, that any municipal action in this area is governed by the Federal Telecommunications Act. So taking no action really isn't an option. The best course of action is for the township to create order and structure. I'll say it again, order and structure in the way that it responds to these applications and the ways that it deals with it. Because if it doesn't, if it just sits on applications, then the township could be in violation of the Federal Telecommunications Act.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Slade, anything to add to that, sir?
I have nothing to add at this point.
Okay, thank you. At this juncture, then I'll open the meeting to the public. Anybody care to be heard? You have 5 minutes, and go ahead, sir, you're first.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Steve Alton. I'm an attorney with Norris, McLaughlin, Marcus, and Bridgewater. I represent New York SMSA with a partnership which does business as Verizon Wireless. I'm here tonight initially to thank Mr. Quinn, Mr. Slade, Mr. Mills, and Mr. Purcell for allowing us to give some input on this ordinance after its introduction. The concern we have with the ordinance is the requirement that the new poles and contaminants are a non-permitted use in residential zones and only a conditional use in the non-residential zones. By way of a little bit of a brief background, as Mr. Purcell said, this is a process that's going on throughout the state. Verizon Wireless initially came to Morris Township asking for consent to go into the right-of-way. And that consent is in connection with Verizon Wireless utilizing poles that are lawfully in the right-of-way. In other words, Verizon Wireless itself doesn't put up any poles. It is not a public utility in New Jersey. It is a common carrier licensed by the Federal Communications Commission. And we came and we submitted a package, as we did with just about 500 some odd municipalities in the state, requesting consent as required under Title 48 to go on the pole of someone who has a right to go and to put the pole there in the first place. The township elected or during that process went to introducing this ordinance. It's our view that the provision that makes this a non-permitted use can effectively prohibit the providing of service in the residential zones. I have here with me tonight a radio frequency engineer who can speak directly to that point. I don't want to encroach beyond my time, so I'll just make one or two other brief comments and turn over to Ms. Francis DeSchulte. I agree with Mr. Purcell's initial comments, except in one minor way. These are not small cell towers. A cell tower customarily is thought of in the public perception as a lattice tower, a monopole, usually of some height. These are small boxes and small antennas that are designed to be put on an existing pole. They're designed to provide coverage by way of filling in gaps. A big cell tower provides a large area coverage. These installations are designed to provide duplicate coverage or needed coverage in areas where there may be lacking that capacity. As Mr. Purcell said, this is all part of the rollout of 5G. The Federal Communications Commission has required the carriers to devise a plan to get this technology out throughout the entire country. We have proposed in our conversations informally with your professionals that instead of making these non-permitted uses, you clearly define in your ordinance what conditions you would want to be met. And in this fashion, the carriers, Verizon Wireless specifically, could address those conditions, and if they were met, would be allowed to go into the areas. This is important for two reasons. Number one, it adds a good deal of certainty to the process. We all know what is required. Secondly, and most importantly, I say this with all due respect to your zoning board and or planning board, the zoning and planning process in New Jersey is one that can go on and on and on. That is exactly what the federal government and the carriers do not want to have happen. This technology has to be rolled out in a timely fashion. If it's not, it'll become antiquated by the time it's approved. As a result, we are very much want to try to find a streamlined procedure other than going before the Board of Adjustment, where there might be a variance or devariance required. By way of that background, I'd like to now introduce Francis O'Schulte.
So hold on, last thing, please.
Steve, I just have one quick question, if that's okay. You stated in your introduction that the application that Verizon made to the township was that to allow for Verizon to locate these facilities on poles lawfully in the right of way. So I take that to mean that as a technical matter, that your client can provide service through use of poles that are existing within the right of way. Is that what that means?
Correct.
Correct.
Let me just explain it further, which Mr. Schulte might have mentioned this, but I will clarify. In Morris Township, the incumbent electric utility, JCP&L, Verizon Wireless has an agreement with all of the utilities in New Jersey, both telephone and electric. In Morris Township, the incumbent utilities are Verizon New Jersey, with whom Verizon Wireless has an agreement, and JCP&L, with whom Verizon Wireless has an agreement. JCP&L does not allow any wireless carrier to put its equipment on the JCP&L poles. In New Jersey, if the poles are jointly used by the telephone and electric utility, the electric utility controls the pole. The JCP&L has required that no equipment be put on their pole other than the antenna. As a result, this requires a ground cabinet to be put on the ground. And that's why I would suggest that your ordinance addresses new poles and ground cabinets on the ground. In PSE&G territory, this is not an issue. You put the cabinets on the PSE&G pole. But in JCP&L territory, that is not an option. Francis, do you spell your name?
O'Schulte, Boschulte. Good evening.
Francis, by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Kirkcon Solutions, located in Lincoln Park, New Jersey.
And what is your position there?
I'm a radio frequency engineer. I've been employed by Kirkcon Solutions and have worked as a radio frequency engineer for over 10 years.
Can you tell us your educational experience, work experience, please?
I hold a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the City College of New York, and I've been employed as a radio frequency engineer for over 15 years.
Have you testified before any zoning boards of adjustments, planning boards, or governing bodies in New Jersey?
Yes, I have. I have testified before many boards throughout the state of New Jersey and New York.
Mr. Upton, what is the offered area of expertise?
The impact of the radio frequency coverage in the areas that we're specifically going to address.
We accept your curriculum vitae and we'll accept her as an expert in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. To your knowledge, does Verizon Wireless presently have any small nodes planned for Morris Township?
Yes, right now there are two small network nodes planned along Spring Valley between Kitchen Road and Van Buren Road.
What type of area is that, by the way, of the development?
It is mainly residential, strictly residential.
What is the present radio coverage or radio frequency coverage in that area?
The challenge is Verizon Wireless currently has macro facilities. When I mention macro facilities, these are wireless facilities that typically have the 3 antennas per sector and 9 to 12 antennas. These macro facilities surround the residential area. We have one located to the northwest along 287 and one to the east at Convent Station. And the challenge is the fact that there's a coverage gap in the middle, strictly where the residential community is. There are, because of the dense foliage and the terrain, it makes it difficult for the existing macro facilities to provide reliable service there.
Can you give any estimate as to the type of coverage that is being served presently there?
Along Spring Valley Road, the signal is so weak that you will not have connectivity to the wireless, Verizon Wireless network. In addition, during busy hour capacity constraints, again, you will not be able to access the network.
And what was the recommended solution to that problem?
The solution was to propose a small network node along Spring Valley Road those two will allow for connectivity, so when as a person who is either walking or living in that particular area or driving, they'll be able to have continuous, reliable service.
And where would that small node equipment be placed?
Well, as previously mentioned, the antenna would go on top of the existing wood pole, and the equipment cabinet would be on the ground.
If the present ordinance prohibited those type of installations in a residential zone, would that have the effect of prohibiting or preventing the provision of service in that area?
Correct, coverage gap would remain.
As we have indicated, I initially again want to thank you for allowing us to make these comments within the time, even if we exceeded it potentially. Again, we would strongly suggest, recommend to the council that instead of making this a non-permitted use, set forth standards that would be acceptable to the township, that could be met and approved by an administrative officer, so that this process can move forward in an expeditious way to the benefit of both parties. Verizon Wireless would know exactly what it needs to do. The township would get the conditions that it would want.
And I would only add a footnote that the fact that we have not challenged your witness's testimony nor put her under oath does not mean that, our silence does not mean we are accepting it as, the law of the case. So, and reasonable experts may differ as to her opinion, which is a lovely lady and I'm sure well qualified in the field, but every point has two views.
Absolutely, Mr. Mills, and we recognize this is not a formal application. The township committee can accept however they'd like to have comment during its public hearing. We felt it important to try to present our position. And Mr. Purcell and Mr. Mills knows there are certain requirements in the Telecom Act which we're all aware of, and we wanted to present this in the context of those requirements.
Steve, I just have one more
Please,
question. So do you understand that under this ordinance, under this structure, you would have the option to make a variance application? Is that something that you're going to do?
Well, I would respectfully say that any time an ordinance, a statute violates or prevents action, you can always seek an appeal or a variance. I would respectfully say that's not what the Telecom Act is entitled to address. Because any ordinance, you can always seek a variance. So there would never be any ordinance provision which would effectively prohibit service, because you could always say, well, you can get a variance. So I would respectfully say that does not solve the problem.
Thank you so very much for your comments, sir. We appreciate it, ma'am, and thank you so much for being here. Would anyone else care to be heard? Just come right up.
Hi, my name is Margie Bissinger. I'm not an expert. I'm a health professional, a physical therapist, and health coach. And I'm very concerned
What was your address, please, ma'am?
Oh, my address, 5 Peachtree Way in Morris Township. So I've lived in Morris Township for almost 30 years, and I love the community. But as I said, I'm a physical therapist and health coach, and I'm very concerned about the health consequences of the EMFs. And we know with 3G and 4G, nothing is 100% disputed right now, it's not. But there have been enough health concerns at that level. There's been a lot of studies written, and especially when people are closer to the cell towers. And so now we're thinking of being early adapters of 5G. To me, it's like almost being guinea pigs for something that we don't know about. We don't see it, we don't hear it, we don't feel it, so we think it's benign. But it's not. I have a whole book on research dedicated to EMFs and the problems. And I think that, not to say I don't believe in technology, I do. However, I think we need to look at this and really evaluate it before we just jump on the bandwagon. And I think if we had to, I do think keeping it away from residential neighborhoods is very important because, as I said, the research shows the closer you are to the cell phone towers, the more cancer, the more Alzheimer's, many more medical problems. But anyway, I just feel as a health professional that we need to really research this by experts and look at it very, very carefully because there's no reason to be one of the first. Right now in Texas, actually, in Houston, they've added the 5G network, and we don't know yet. We're talking microwave is 1 to 3 gigahertz. This 5G network is 30 to 60. So it's a lot more smaller cell towers, and it's very different than what we currently have. So I'm just asking the committee to really look at this carefully, get your health experts, really see what's going on, and maybe wait a little bit. Wait a little bit and just see before we jump onto something that could have very serious consequences. And, you know, I look at my neighborhood and kids there, and you just hate to think we would be doing something that could really negatively impact the health of all the people here in Morris County that we care so much about.
Just ourselves.
So, thank you very much for your comment. I think that is that's certainly something that comes up. So as far as our decision-making here and the policy-making that the township can participate in, it is curtailed by the Federal Telecommunications Act. And what the Federal Telecommunications Act says is that municipalities and local government can't base zoning decisions for wireless facilities based on environmental effects, health effects. Essentially, the federal government, the FCC, has said, you know, we looked at this, if you follow our standards, this is safe, and local government, state government, you can't prohibit or regulate wireless facilities based on those concerns. So I understand what you're saying, but from our perspective and the action that the township committee takes, and from our policymaking perspective, it really falls outside the scope of something that we can consider here.
Oh, I see. Is there an agency beyond that? I know on a national level this is an issue. I think people all over the country, I know I've seen in Washington, D.C.
So that would be the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC.
Oh, okay. Well, I think from what you've said, though, at least in the township, you've made provisions for the neighborhoods, that you're not going to put the cell towers right in the neighborhood. So I think given what you do have control over, to me that sounded, at least that's a better situation than having people live closer. So,
Thank you, ma'am.
thank you very much.
Just as a follow-up or a point of clarification, you know, we've been working on this for approximately a year, so it's not something that, you know, is just come out, and we just want to make sure that, you know, we establish standards to help, you know, protect the residents, is really what this is based on.
Ms. Wilson had a question.
One question, the Federal Telecommunications Act that you just referenced, is that recent or long-standing?
Well, there's federal law on this for quite a while. The Federal Telecommunications Act that we're discussing was enacted in 1996.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Name and address,
I
please.
don't think, is this working at all, by the way, or am I deafer than I was yesterday?
It may have to be pulled closer to the podium.
Okay, I didn't think of that. Tom Stark, I'm at 22 Linfield Drive. I sort of had more questions as to what the configuration of this thing was. And maybe you guys can answer this. Where is this box on the ground in relationship to the pole? Is this all right if I ask them?
We have, I have something I can hand down that can be shown to you.
I saw something on the internet that was pretty ugly.
I'm not going to go there. These happen to be pole mounted, but the same style and size of box would be what I think I would see on the ground. Is that right, Mr. Purcell?
Okay, something a little bigger than this podium, I guess. And would it go right next to the pole?
I think that is a issue of the utility that owns the pole. So I know that JCP&L, I believe, has some limitations as to how close it allowed to be to the pole. I think it's 8 feet, am I right, Steve?
8 feet,
Yeah.
Say that again, please.
8 feet.
Away.
That's a JCP&L requirement.
Okay, it's getting uglier because it's taken up more geography. What would be the spacing on these things? Every pole along the street?
So the way that the ordinance is drafted, that there would have to be at least 150 feet between each small cell installation. So that would be the limitation. You couldn't have one right up against the other.
And would they be needed relatively closely? So if in my neighborhood, that would be every other pole.
Well, my understanding is that the distance that these facilities go to is about 1,000 feet. So one provider would really only need to have one small cell every 1,000 feet. But you know, the issue is you want to have as many of those existing poles able to carry one of these facilities. Just because you have more than one provider, you have multiple providers. There's AT&T and Sprint and Verizon, and you know, they need to be able to provide service within the township.
Is there a noise associated with the cabinet?
My understanding is that there may be a slight hum, a very light hum, but that it's not a particularly loud.
Not a fan?
Again, I think we discussed this the other day, Steve, do you have any other?
No, there's no fan. If you've ever had a whole house generator, it's quieter than that. A whole house generator has a hum, rather loud sound. These are just a slight hum. It's like a transformer hum.
Okay, loud sound is a little bit of an understatement.
A generator?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like that. It's like a transformer hum. That you have to reach.
Okay, I was thinking of a noisy fan
No, there's no
on my
fan.
basement refrigerator. I find myself with a little sympathy to their point that leaving the restrictions and requirements vague and requiring a variance is sort of kicking the can down the road. It'd be good if you guys could get together and say, this is what we'll allow and what we won't allow.
Exactly what we're trying to do.
Okay, but it's not in the current ordinance.
Well, we're saying what we allow in non-residential areas, that's quite clear. We're saying what we allow on existing poles, that's quite clear. And we're saying that in residential areas, the placement of new poles and ground level cabinets require a variance, meaning that the applicant will have to show positive and negative criteria and
Right.
follow the variance process as it's normally
It's that
provided.
latter point. It is leaving that variance to be debated in future meetings, I guess. I'd be happier to know what the limitation and requirements are on installations in residential areas, because that's what we residents are concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Starkey. Yes, ma'am. No, sir.
Just getting up to 11
Just
and,
letting me in.
my name is Lisa Brick. I live at 7 Evans Farm Road. I've been in the township as long as my 30-year-old has been alive. It's been 30 years now. What can you do to protect the citizens and residents of this township? If there's a debate, we actually don't know. There's data on all sides as to whether this is dangerous or this isn't dangerous and how dangerous it is. And we'll probably know 50 years or 60 years, just like with thalidomide. We didn't know in the 1960s. It took the births of a lot of children and then getting to reproductive age to know what it had done to their uterus and ovaries. How can you be cautious and protect us from potential boxes that are every 1,000 feet in certain neighborhoods that may or may not damage our children's health or our adults' health as we move forward? That is my question, and I'll acknowledge that it's very important for the township in terms of property values to keep our technology up to date, and we all benefit in many ways from the technology. So with all those things said, what power do you have to protect us? The federal law was created long before this technology was even a dream. Well, no, let me take that back. It was probably a dream, but long before it was created. And just one other point, the gentleman said that the way New Jersey municipalities act, often technology can be antiquated before it's approved. Well, on that logic, what happens to antiquated technology after it's approved?
So the first question that you have, again, it's a follow-up to the previous question. I think the answer to a certain extent that the FCC has preempted our ability to really, unfortunately, to consider those effects. Once a facility meets the requirements of the FCC, it's really beyond our ability to really go beyond that and explore those concerns farther. Again, that's a federal issue.
So you're saying that the township has absolutely no ability to protect residents' potential health and well-being from the effects of cell towers?
It has the ability to look out for the safety interests as regards site triangles and issues with being able to view the right-of-way and cars
That's a
coming,
yes
things
or
like
no
that.
question.
And-
Does the township have the ability to protect the health consequences, potential health consequences, or even consider it, given the current law?
The federal government has preempted that ability.
So, no.
That's my answer. The federal government has preempted our ability to do that.
Okay, so no. Then, in that case, everything else is pretty much a moot point.
And we all live in this township.
I know.
And we're concerned. We hear what your concerns are. And what we're doing, in my opinion, is preempting having a tremendous growth of these that we have no control over. And what we want to do is keep control over what we have.
Thank you, Barry. And how can you do that given the federal law? And this isn't redundant, it's a real, I'm curious, you know, what this gentleman just said. How do you do that?
The short answer, although maybe a little not flippant, but at least with respect to residential locations, each site would be considered on a case-by-case basis. So the affected residents or potentially affected residents would have the opportunity to voice their opinions, much as you have done right now. Whether those opinions are sufficient to overcome federal law, which has made a finding that the RFI EMF from even the large cell towers is not hazardous to human health, I don't know. I'm not saying I agree with that finding, by the way, but that's what they have said.
Thank you. So I appreciate the honesty that really hands are tied in this in terms of the federal law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Anyone else care to be heard? Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, good evening. My name is Pamela Watson. My
And we'll
address
pull the
is
microphone down to your...
Can you hear me now? Let me think myself.
That's a Verizon plan, isn't it?
Yeah, pay this guy $5.
My name is Pamela Watson. I reside at 2 Coy Road, Morris Township. I had a question concerning the health issue, but in sitting here, I realized that there is definitely a health issue. And I'm sure that everybody in this room knows that there is a health issue that's associated with the cell towers. My question then is, do these cell towers generate radiation? And if so, do you know how much?
I'm not an RF engineer. I'm happy to, we do have one in the audience if you want to come up and speak to that point. But, there's...
Only the mayor here.
Yeah, just,
That's,
No, I was
You
just
go on.
asking you.
okay, yeah, I have no knowledge of that.
So then I asked this question because all of a sudden I saw cell towers. It's like, where did this come from? Did this come from, as this gentleman was talking, because residents on Van Buren Road and Spring Valley Road are complaining about the poor service they're getting from Verizon Wireless because they have weak signals. And then is this where these cell towers are coming from? Because people are complaining they're not getting a good signal. And this is a way to try to...
We don't
get the
know
customers?
whether Verizon has received complaints. This body has not received any direct citizen complaints of service.
Okay, so where do cell towers idea come from? Where did it evolve from? Did it evolve from where? Verizon Wireless?
Well, I think
It's just,
there's different companies. Verizon Wireless is one of them, and they have needs to provide coverage to fill in gaps in their coverage. And then what these essentially are meant to do is to provide more capacity, these small cells. So if everybody's on their phone, that there's adequate capacity for everyone to be able to connect to the wireless.
okay, so it's just like when I'm talking to a friend of mine, they're in a wooded area or going down a hill or going through, I'm getting ready to go into a bad zone, okay, I'm gonna lose you. Is it that important that we have to have these cell towers because we're missing like 2-3 seconds of conversation before we get connected?
Well, the federal telecommunications law says that municipalities cannot prohibit or have effect of prohibiting personal wireless service. So to the extent that there's gaps, we need to work with the providers to fill those gaps.
So those are the gaps you're talking about?
Right, and that's the federal law that we're operating on.
Again, not that I agree with it, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Purcell, but one of the federal mandates is that seamless coverage be provided. Is that correct?
Well, if a wireless provider has a gap, and they can demonstrate that there's a gap, then it would be very difficult for a municipality to effectively prohibit them from filling that gap.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I'm Ronald Kendrell, I live at 250 Martin Luther King Avenue. You were saying that the FCC has required this, or has approved this. I wonder about other agencies such as OSHA, environmental commissions, environmental agencies. Are they involved in this at all? And have they taken a look at the impact that this has, as they did with power lines and those communities where they don't want to provide or have power because of electromagnetic problems, causing health problems?
I don't have any knowledge of other federal agencies. I know that to the extent that Verizon is providing service, or AT&T, or any of these wireless companies in the form of small cells, that their technology is licensed and approved by the Federal Communications Commission.
Seeing that when you place these cells on a pole, and that these radio waves or microwave or electromagnetic waves have trouble going through certain structures, they don't bend around corners. So therefore, you have to have an antenna on a pole almost every 100 feet. And if you have multiple carriers, they're adding. So what type of structure are you looking at as far as poles? How many?
Well, what we're saying is that on existing poles that are on poles that the small cell can't be within 150 feet of any other small cell, so that's the limitation there. As regards new poles, no new pole can be within 100 feet of any existing pole. So there is some limitation as regards the finite space that's in the right of way.
But at this time, I would also think that the committee would also need to know if the environmental agencies, if OSHA and these other government agencies have any input into this before we go continue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Diane Holland, 26 Northbridge Place. The ordinance appears to talk about what it can't do or where we can't put things. Could you take it into the positive and say where the poles can be put, just because sometimes it's hard to think in the negative? And then, has a study been done, since we know there are multiple carriers, about how many poles we might end up with? Because if Cricket says I have to have coverage, and we're dealing with 100 feet and all of the rest of that, has the town done an estimate of what we might be looking at?
Well, as far as what can be done, so we're saying that new poles can be, under certain conditions, be placed in non-residential areas, and ground level cabinets can be placed with certain conditions in non-residential areas. And then on existing poles, that nodes and pole-mounted cabinets can be placed on existing poles. As regards a study as to what the future might hold, that's a very speculative project, given where we're going and how technology is changing and how because the market is changing so much, but that is something that we did not undertake.
Do you know how many poles we have in the community now?
No.
I'm sorry.
Telephone pole.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
Good. All right. Mr. Quinn.
It's approximately 2,200 telephone utility poles.
Telephone, those
These
are
utility
the
poles, to be approximately.
utility, like JCP&L poles that could have these towers.
I'm sorry, you know what? You got to times that by about 3 because it's number of streetlights on them. So it's about 6,000 probably.
Now, those are the wooden poles?
Correct.
Okay. So are we talking about these antennas, nodes go on the wooden poles, they go on metal poles, they go on both?
They go on existing poles. So any pole that is lawfully within the right of way, where a wireless carrier can get permission to use the pole, then that is then they can go on those poles. So most instances it would be a wooden pole, and it would be one of the number listed by Tim. Yeah.
Aren't we hearing that JCP&L doesn't allow them on their poles?
JCP&L, some would appear, based on what Verizon has been stating that at some point has made a decision to not allow them onto their pole. The boxes themselves, and the nodes are allowed. I think it's an issue about the boxes, but whether and to what extent that stays a policy of JCP&L in the future, I really don't know. But that is the policy now here.
It sounded like, I thought the gentleman said that the antenna could go on the pole, but the box has to go elsewhere. Does every antenna get a box? No. Do you know, what's the ratio? If the,
I really don't have a, that's a very technical question. Actually, I really don't have an answer for it. Mayor.
it would be helpful to know, because it might calm residents thinking that every single antenna is going to end up with a box, you know, this size running down the street. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Frank Hasden. I live at 17 Kennedy Road. Just to give you a little background on myself, I am an expert in this field of civil engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer with over 20 years experience in the design of telecommunication sites. I've designed hundreds of these types of applications in New Jersey and multiple states around. So I just want to tell you where my background comes from. I feel that it's very important that these will be allowed throughout the township, and equally important then to make sure that the ordinance does set those stipulations to control what exactly you want to end up seeing once it's built. So that's the part that I think is important, is to make sure that there's a good understanding of what goes into the installation for all the different types of carriers, to make sure the ordinance is written in a manner that it covers things very specifically. Just for example, the stipulation of the size of the equipment cabinet being limited to 28 cubic feet. The definition of what is the equipment cabinet. With the antenna installations with some of the carriers, there's auxiliary equipment, a remote radio head or a tower-mounted amplifier, etc., which can at times be, you know, the size of small mailboxes, etc., mounted onto those poles as well. That can add up to more things mounted to the side of the pole than the initial equipment cabinet that you're thinking about. Additionally, each of the sites typically will require its own electric service and its own telephone service that will have a meter pan and sometimes a box for the telephone service. So all these things can be built into small contained spaces very well at the base of poles, or we've mounted them on poles, but it's just important that all that is stipulated into how you're calculating those sum totals. And then similarly with the antenna itself, I don't know if the ordinance has a size limitation to the antenna, but that's something that you should possibly consider if you don't, because I can tell you in Baltimore, we've installed canisters on top of utility poles that are 4, 6, or 8 feet tall. That's not the case here in New Jersey. I've done 25-inch, just like you described. But new technologies will bring about new changes, so it's just to make sure that it's written in there. And then if you do have those stipulations, I think what the gentleman was saying earlier about being able to just know what you're designing towards in any of the different zones would really seem logical to me as an engineer. I know what stipulations I have to meet, and then whether it's in a commercial zone or a residential zone, I know what I can make it look like. So that's just how
the sizes of the boxes, that's something we discussed with Verizon, and increase the size of the cabinets to make sure that they encapsulate all of their equipment. And need the size of the cabinet at 28 cubic feet. That's the number that's been come up with by the Broadband Development Advisory Committee. That's an FCC subcommittee, creating a model code for in regards to this. And so that I think that's a well thought out.
And that would house the radio heads, and you'd only have from there a cable going to the antenna.
Well, that would be well the 28 for the cabinet, and anything other equipment that needs to be on the ground. And then as far as the pole, it would be 14. Again, that includes all of the
putting 14 additional.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very helpful, thank you.
Legal word 10 Arrowhead Road. Is there anything within this ordinance if a resident lives on a county road, that is there's a right of way on the county road, does the county have control of that right of way so that people, is there an order of operations?
Sure. Well, that's a very good question. So the way that would operate is under New Jersey law, a county can only give consent for the placement of these type of facilities into the right of way if a municipality in which the county road is located also gives consent. So the way that the ordinance is drafted is that this would be the method by which we would give our consent to any use of a county right of way. These are the standards that would have to be met before they could get that approval to operate in the county right of way on a site-specific basis.
Thank you. And for residents, I'm assuming there's some residential areas or residences in the township that are maybe within, say, 10 or 15 feet of the right of way. Is there anything in the ordinance to protect really sort of areas of residential occupancy where those poles, so someone doesn't necessarily have one of these antennas maybe 20 feet outside of their window or 15? Is there any control towards or referencing, trying to call that out specifically to limit it?
Well, I mean, to the extent that a pole is there is lawfully within the right of way, this structure would allow the placement of, subject to the issuance of a supplemental license, the placement of these type of facilities within that pole. And obviously, before that license can be issued, there will be some discussion about placement and shrouding and trying to make it as unobtrusive as possible. But there, if you're saying, is there something in there in regards to those type of very site-specific scenarios about being close to a better window or something like that, that's not really in there.
Have you seen examples of that where it has been included in other municipalities or other towns that you?
I have not.
Yeah. Thank you. Could you just give us a brief status on, so is 5G is rolled out, it's not rolled out, it's still being baked? I mean, is it really arrived yet, or? So I'm just trying to get a sense of the timing of when that's
Well,
going.
I think if you read the Wall Street Journal, it's basically, there's an article about it every single day, but it's not quite here yet. I think it's still somewhat in the planning stages.
So given that it's somewhat still in the planning stages, and we're planning for it now, it's really not imminent that it's going to be coming, in the next year and a half, 2 years. I'm trying to.
Well, so I think what this does is, so it meets the needs of the wireless carriers now, vis-a-vis what they need for extra capacity to meet their current needs, and then in the future, this is how they will roll out 5G with the use of these nodes. So it has some facility now with 4G, but then it also will be the basis to roll out 5G in the future.
In your opening comments, you had said that there could be, because of the FCC regulations, I believe that there could be a potentiality that the township would be in violation of, I guess, those regulations and subject to litigation at some point in the future. That's nothing that's imminent or potentially. Have you seen that?
Well, I think that's.
Have you seen other municipalities already being litigation?
I have not seen that in New Jersey. The Federal Telecommunications Act restricts the ability of municipalities in this area of telecommunications. Essentially, the municipality cannot prohibit or effectively prohibit wireless service. So, that's just something that we're trying to here provide a system in which wireless carriers can reasonably provide service, but also create reasonable restrictions that can protect the township's interests in aesthetics and safety and to manage its right of way. So that's sort of how we're trying to handle this.
And as I was thinking about where these what may potentially be good locations for these, my first inclination was, okay, these would be good on like major corners, not in residential areas. But then when I hear about the equipment that can hang off these poles, I would then start to think that maybe those wouldn't be good locations because of the size of the cabinets and what could hang off those poles, pushing these more towards residential areas. Is there any?
Well, I mean, there's in the supplemental, in the master license agreement and in the ordinance, it makes clear that that when these facilities do get placed onto existing poles and in cabinets, there are size limitations, and then also that they have to be done in a way in which there's no violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, that people can pass and repass the sidewalks and that people's sight triangles when they drive are not affected. So there are those safeguards in there to help deal with some of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, to Mr. Slade's point, I know you've been working on this for a long time, Mr. Slade, and I think the memorandum you put together explaining it, I think was an excellent job. You did a good overview. I really guess the township is trying to get ahead on this and bring some order and structure to what is a chaotic scene playing out, I guess, across the country on this issue. To me, I could be, my interpretation is perhaps the carriers are taking advantage of maybe a deregulated environment, or trying to get this wrapped up real quick while they can. I'm not sure what's happening on the political level, but what it seems to me is, from my assessment, given that 5G is still in the planning stages, it's not anywhere imminent. There's no imminent litigation facing this township committee. Mr. Slade's done a great job. Perhaps there's a benefit and value to learning what other municipalities do and roll out and get lessons learned and best practices from that. If we say this got wrapped up 6 months down the road from now, 7 months, and it was even better, or potentially have other input and just a better overall plan based on lessons learned. I just don't get what the urgency is. So I think the first woman who spoke from Peachtree Way, I just don't understand why this has, why this has to be up for a final vote tonight and be signed, sealed, and delivered, so to speak, without the benefit of maybe some additional time.
The concern is that there are maybe more pending applications to place these facilities. There may be more pending applications to place facilities within the right of way, and to the extent that this gets put off and put off and put off, it could be viewed as an effective prohibition. So, when a wireless carrier makes an application to place these facilities, we're obliged to respond. And right now, it's difficult for us to find a structure and order to this to respond, and that's what this ordinance gives us. It gives us the ability to respond, and waiting that period of time may be inherently problematic under the federal law.
But given the fact that Mr. Slade in this township has already dedicated a lot of time, energy, resources, and is sort of on it and is on the issue and addressing it, I don't see how that would not potentially be viewed as kicking it down the road, and I think the opposite. Maybe we're taking it more heads on than some of the other 535 municipalities. Right? I think the gentleman from Verizon said it seemed like that was the first order of business, is to initiate the request in all the municipalities.
Well, I think one thing that's happened is in a number of municipalities is certain wireless carriers have requested non-site specific approvals, meaning that essentially the approval of the township or any municipality will put whatever they wish, wherever they wish to a certain extent. And that's something that the township, to its credit, did not do. And it set forth to create some structure and order to the way in which it handles this. And as far as other municipalities, the township's put forth a fair amount of expertise, time, and energy to try to, again, to create order and structure here. There needs to be something in place to deal with these applications.
Thanks for the update. I appreciate it. And my final comment would be, just again, I don't know what the urgency is. I don't know why this has to be up for a final vote tonight when nothing seems imminent. It seems like another example of, again, another issue where there are residents with concern issues, have questions on it, and now this is the opportunity to do it rather than engaging in a more different type of dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, Mike Schumer, 16 Powderhorn Drive. Just a few thoughts with respect to this. I'm sure the Code of Federal Regulations are specifying that Verizon has to be the only game in town in terms of putting equipment on poles or shared infrastructure. I'm sure that in the future, AT&T, Sprint, et cetera, may be looking at increasing their coverage, and you may be getting applications from those entities as well. My question to the duty experts: have you investigated distributed antenna systems? DASs are shared by multiple carriers, so they're a little bit more expensive. The carriers don't like them because it's not their equipment going up on a telephone pole. It's a technology that's shared by multiple vendors. There's the rub. The multiple vendors aren't getting the revenue that they would require if their own equipment was on a on a telephone pole or a piece of shared infrastructure moving forward. So my thought on this is, if you haven't considered distributed antenna systems, then perhaps that could be something that you can think about, because that's the way you get shared infrastructure. Because a DAS will allow Verizon, AT&T, MCI, Sprint, whomever, to share that technology, and it's less intrusive than some of the equipment that would maybe going up on a telephone pole. My fear is that once access is given to Verizon or to AT&T, and they have access to that infrastructure, what they put on that infrastructure is governed by the FCC, not the municipality. So over time, they can put anything they want. So just a few thoughts moving forward. I would like to see more of a thought process on shared infrastructure vis-a-vis a DAS or a distributed antenna system type of environment. Just a few thoughts.
I'm sorry, what was the acronym?
DAS, it's a distributed antenna system. They're less intrusive. They're a little bit more expensive, but they can be shared by multiple carriers. So it's just something to think about.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Next.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hector Brown, K2 Farmhouse Lane. My first question is with respect to the spacing and size of the cabinets. Has, I guess, the town council spoken with other carriers other than Verizon? I hear Verizon is the main carrier everyone's been speaking about, but has the town worked with T-Mobile, for instance, or AT&T with respect to their spacing and size requirements?
Verizon has been on point on this issue, reaching out to the towns. Those wireless carriers have really not been engaging us the same way that Verizon is.
My next question, and I'm just speaking from, so I work in the telecom industry, I work for T-Mobile, so I'm just listening to a lot of the feedback that the residents have. My next question would be, has the town, or is the town thinking of pre-approving some sort of designs that would be situated on the poles? Because it sounds like the aesthetics might be the problem. So if there's maybe 8 or 10 designs that the voting body or whomever has that decision-making power, has that something that the town has considered?
Well, for the placement of facilities on existing poles,
And use the microphone.
for the placement of facilities on existing poles, that'll be done by way of supplemental license. So, it's something that can be done relatively quickly and streamlined for the use of existing poles.
So the additional thing with respect to, I guess, I think you guys mentioned earlier, kicking the can down the road instead of, I guess, codifying some sort of process. Would it not be more beneficial for, I guess, the town to, instead of having each carrier go to the zoning board to get the approval on a case-by-case basis, wouldn't it just make more sense to save everyone's time, a streamlined process?
Well, to the extent that something is on an existing pole and that infrastructure is already there and the streamlined process is appropriate, to the extent that you're putting new facilities within the right-of-way, particularly in a residential area, certainly that raises a great concern in regards to aesthetics and right-of-way management and safety, and also legal issues as to adjacent property owners who may or may not own the fee or the right-of-way. So it's a little less legally simple to do that. We're talking about new infrastructure.
So in your opinion, if I may ask, does the aesthetics outweigh the actual coverage or capacity need of both the residents as well as the carrier?
No. I mean, it's really, it's going to be a site-specific analysis when it comes to placing these facilities within residential areas. It's really something that really needs to be done on an individual basis.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else care to be heard in this matter? Mr. O'Reilly.
Well, my name has already been announced. I'm Jim O'Reilly, 15 Independence Way. Just a couple of questions. Is there a history of litigation on this aspect of Federal Communications Act or Telecommunications Act as to whether challenging the power of the Federal Communications or the act itself to prohibit states or local governments from?
There's quite a lot of litigation in regards to siting of macro cell facilities. You know, these type of things, small right of way. The Federal Telecommunications Act applies to it. There's really not a ton of cases on point, but it's a very heavily litigated area of the law. I'll tell you that.
Was there ever an option to challenge the law in that respect?
As to its effectiveness over
Or
municipalities?
to challenge, was there ever a legal option, or has it already been fully litigated that the local government or the state government can't take health considerations into account?
Yes.
That's been fully litigated?
Yes.
Okay. Now, given that we can't in advance raise issues of health, is it possible to monitor the effects of these towers or devices on the public health and for future action if it proves that the fears are justified? Or is it still excluded?
Well, essentially what the federal law says is that we cannot take health concerns and environmental concerns into consideration when we're citing these facilities. It's unclear to me, the legality of, the township can always take complaints, can always listen to its residents, can always monitor things. But, as far as action that it takes in regards to the citing of these facilities, it really can't consider health and safety and environmental impacts under federal law. That's preempted.
Even after the fact. I mean, even after the thing's been installed. I mean, you can't take it into account in planning them, but you're saying you can't take it into account by monitoring after the fact.
I'm saying I really can't comment on that.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in the public here to be heard?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to really give the committee an opportunity to ask me any questions and allow me, if you would, just very briefly to respond to some of the comments. I would first mention with respect to the issue of distributed antenna systems, because there were some questions from the committee and the council about that. Verizon Wireless deploys distributed antenna systems. They're on distributed antenna systems, outdoor distributed antenna systems of other parties. We have one in Princeton. It was installed in Princeton Township. Now it's the Unified Princeton. About 4 or 5 years ago, the system is owned by Crown Communications. It was put in by NextG. The type of equipment needed for a distributed antenna system would not fit this ordinance. This ordinance is geared for a different sort of installation. These installations are purely designed as small cells to serve a specific niche. They're designed to meet a capacity issue. It's not a voice capacity. These are not about dropping a call when you're driving your car. This is about the transmission of data. Data, when these networks were built, 90% of the traffic is voice. Now it's 85 to 90% data. And the capacity needs are increasing day by day. These devices are designed to meet that need, whether it be 4G, 5G, whatever. That's what the need is about. These are not towers. These are not outdoor distributed antenna systems. These are, as Mr. Purcell described, relatively small installations on existing poles. Verizon Wireless is not a public utility in New Jersey. It does not put in poles. It doesn't have the authority to put poles in the right-of-way. It has the right, subject to consent of the municipality, to go on poles of those who are lawfully in the right-of-way. And that's, they come in, a utility company, a competitive local exchange carrier, which is called CLEC, or someone else who has a right to go in the right-of-way. We're not going to be putting up poles all over the place. As of now, the proposal that Verizon Wireless had initially presented was for 2 locations. That's what this is about presently. Obviously, in the future, this could expand. As Mr. Purcell mentioned, Verizon Wireless has applied to a number of municipalities, over 500 in the state. We have approximately, now it's about 250 consents. The majority of those consents are just consents. You can go on poles in the public right-of-way. We have installations in or plan to go in Chester Township, Mendon Township. So this is not a unique or a different issue. It's something that's happening throughout the state, it's happening throughout the country.
Steve, it's just, I know we use the word tower sometimes, but really it's a base station, correct? That's what these poles would be under the federal law, they'd be a base station?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Council, is the issue in Morris Township that JCP&L will not allow you to install the box, what I'm going to say is the box, the 28 cubic foot box on their poles?
That would mitigate the issue tremendously.
That's
It would essentially eliminate, by and large, eliminate the problem that we confront, that we have with this present ordinance.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I ask one question? You were talking about how you would like the conditions spelled out.
Yes.
Can you give an example, or give an example of what types of conditions you're talking
Sure.
about?
Well, say, you might say in ordinance, a new pole is described in the ordinance. And a new pole in the ordinance is described as one that's erected primarily to serve a wireless carrier. For example, if we went to Verizon, New Jersey, and said, we want to put in a small cell at this location, we need telephone service, they may put in a pole for us, because we're a customer as anyone else. Verizon, New Jersey, as the incumbent phone company, has the right and obligation to provide service to universally. What we were suggesting is, if we want to put a box, shall we say, on the ground in a residential zone, the ordinance would say it has to be X distance from the curb cut, it has to be this size, it has to be these dimensions, it has to be configured in this way. That's what we're looking for. The same thing for a new pole was required. The pole would have to be no greater than X amount from any adjacent pole, would not be closer than this to a residence. Whatever requirements you thought were pertinent, we'd like those standards set forth. So we know what you want, we can accommodate that without the necessity of going to the Board of Adjustment, where not that the decision will be arbitrary necessarily, but it just makes more sense to have the standards set forth in the ordinance, and we can all move forward in a constructive way in a manner I would suggest.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Is the vision that somewhere down the road, every block and every street will have one of these antennas and boxes, and as the technology increases and we catch up to it, is that the vision that every 150 feet or every 1,000 feet we're going to have a pole or a box?
That is a very good question. I honestly cannot answer you. That's not the vision presently. But I can say to you, on a personal note, I've been doing work for Verizon Wireless since predecessor, Federal Internet Global, since 1987. When I started, they didn't think towers were in existence in 20 years. So no one really knows in all candor. That's not anticipated, that's not the vision people want. Right now, it's really RF driven, radio frequency driven. If the coverage and capacity is there, you don't want to put a new node in or a new pole in. That's not the intention. It's only where the capacity mandates some greater coverage.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor?
All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. Mr. Purcell, I just have a question. If this evening we take no action on this ordinance, or if this ordinance is not adopted, what happens next? What does Verizon come in and, if we do nothing, will we have an opportunity then to have Verizon come in and just put them on what they want, or do we have some other way to?
If the status quo, if the township does nothing, they don't automatically have the right to place facilities in the right way, but the issue may arise where there may be an argument to say that there may be some sort of effective prohibition. The township has not acted on this application, is not processing these applications.
Meaning then the township could be sued?
Correct.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else, I'll close the public hearing and ask if anybody from the dais has any other questions or.
I want to talk about a different issue altogether,
No,
is that
I'm here.
right?
I'm here. Different issue.
Like,
Honey?
it's a different issue.
A different issue, ma'am?
Yeah.
No, no,
So, okay, I'm sorry, the first time I'm
Thank
here.
you. Okay. Anybody from the dais care to make any comment or any thought process as to where we are before we vote?
So I just want to clarify this notion of non-site specific approvals. That occurs in other towns that do not have ordinances such as this, is that correct?
That has occurred in other towns that don't have ordinances such as this.
So in other words, there are many towns in New Jersey that have an ordinance and carriers can come in and put their equipment wherever?
Well, you know, as discussed, the issue becomes municipality cannot unreasonably discriminate amongst wireless carriers. So the issue is, you know, when a town provides something like that to one carrier, where they essentially allow them to put whatever they wish, wherever they want to put it, that raises issues of ability of the town to regulate other carriers down the road. So it's not something that I would advise. Having said that, a lot of towns have done that.
To piggyback on the person Sisler's comment, we get sued and we lose, then what happens?
Katie bought the truck.
So at that point, they're going to put their equipment in anyway, and we have less control over how it's put in.
Well, at that point, you know, if there is a lawsuit and the township is, a portion of it is invalidated, then we can explore other options, other administrative standards that, again, you know, are protective of the right of way, but in a way that would comply with the Federal Telecommunications Act.
Any other comments? I just want to say a few things, that there are 566 townships in the state of New Jersey, and very few have enacted ordinances such as this. And I think to protect our residents and our citizens, to stay ahead of the curve and not to have any preemptive situations occur, I think our choices are very, very limited. And I would certainly, you know, express that feeling to anybody who cared to challenge what we were doing. So we have a motion and a second, and a roll call, please.
Mr. Arvanites?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Sisler?
I think there are too many variables and too many questions for me to vote positive. I'm going to, I think it's a fine piece of legislation, but I'm going to abstain.
Mr. Nunn?
Yes.
Mayor Mancuso?
Yes. I, Peter Mancuso, Mayor, declare this ordinance adopted and finally passed, approve the same and direct the clerk publish proper notice thereof in the newspaper, and record the ordinance in the proper place. Mr. Mills. Ordinance number 1018.
Yes, Mayor. It is an ordinance of the Township of Morris, Morris County, New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 95 entitled Zoning by adding a new Article 13 entitled Co-location on existing towers and base stations for public hearing and final consideration.
Okay. Mr. Purcell, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, this is just a house
ordinance
ordinance, as I said before, that implements the FCC's co-location order. And essentially says that there are certain co-locations to existing towers and base stations that are not a substantial change that a municipality is obliged to approve.
It encourages co-location, is that what you're...
Correct. Correct.
Okay, I'll open the meeting to the public now. Anybody care to be heard on ordinance number 1018? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Anybody from the dais care to make any comments? If not, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
No, we didn't have the motion
Did
yet.
I have a motion?
I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay. May I have a motion? Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Arvanites?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Sisler?
Abstain.
Mr. Nunn?
Yes.
Mayor Mancuso?
Yes. I, Peter Mancuso, Mayor, declare the ordinance adopted and finally passed. Approve the same and direct the clerk to publish proper notice thereof in the newspaper and record the ordinance in the